Hi everyone, this is Grandmaster Eugene Perelshteyn, and welcome to my DVD on the Accelerated Dragon defense for Black. So I have been playing Accelerated Dragon all my life with pretty good success, and I want to share with you the ideas of this opening. For some of you, you may already play the regular dragon, and you realize the problems that you get. The Yugoslav attack, where white castles long and your king can usually get in trouble. Well, Accelerated Dragon comes to the rescue. This is a very specific move order that totally avoids getting into the Yugoslav attack where white castles long, and therefore the game becomes a little bit more positional, where the player who knows the plans, pawn structures, and typical ideas will prevail. So let me show you what I mean by the Accelerated Dragon. So this is the Sicilian defense, e4, c5, and white typically plays knight f3. So Accelerated Dragon could be played by the move knight c6. As a matter of fact, I don't recommend this move order because of the very simple idea. White doesn't have to play d4, which will just transpose. So after c takes d, knight takes g6. This is the classical, you can say, Accelerated Dragon, where black is going to fianchetto his dark square bishop. But there is one problem. The problem is that white can play this move bishop b5, which is a totally different opening. This is called the Rosso Limo, and believe me, this is a huge chapter. If you can avoid it, then why even bother allowing white to go into this line? There is tons and tons of theory here. Black is okay. Black has many ways to counter this, but this is extra material that you absolutely don't need to learn. So instead, I recommend the hyper Accelerated Dragon move order, this move g6. There are some small drawbacks of this move, such as when white plays d4, after c takes d, white can take with the queen, but I actually welcome this early queen move for white, because I won a number of really cool games where the queen was actually misplaced, and black managed to get quick counterplay. So we will cover this as well. But the main line is, of course, after c takes d, knight takes, and now we play knight c6. So this clever move order avoids the Rosso Limo and cuts down your theory, the theory that you have to know, by almost a half, because bishop b5 is played just as much as d4 these days. So what can white do in this position? So of course, after knight c3, and this is the main line, bishop g7, bishop e3, the game is very similar to the regular dragon. Notice all the benefits: the fianchettoed bishop, the knight on c6 putting pressure on the d4 knight, with one key difference. In the regular dragon, this d7 pawn is on d6, which is a valuable tempo that doesn't allow white to build up his attack. So if white tries to go for the Yugoslav attack with a move order, let's say f3, so let's say black plays knight f6, f3, and castle, queen d2. So again, the difference here is very important. In the regular dragon, the pawn is on d6, and it's white to move. So if black were to play this move d6, we are in the most popular and very sharp line of the regular dragon, where black can get into a lot of trouble. White is simply going to start moving the pawns, and as Bobby Fischer used to say, oh, white's plan is very simple. Check, check, mate. Well, with an open h-file, it's going to be very hard for black to fight against this plan. But let's go back. Notice that I just made this move d6, which is totally doesn't have to be made. Instead, d5, exclam, and this move refutes this whole setup for white. And as a funny thing, somebody actually played this against me on the white side, and he actually got into a lot of trouble. So let me just show you this miniature to see how easily white can get into a lot of trouble. So e takes d, knight takes, and so my opponent realized that something went wrong. He hasn't castled, and all of a sudden his bishop is under attack. So he took my knight, queen takes, so he took again, queen takes, and now he realized if he castles, this is just a bad version of the regular dragon. I already have one of my bishops fully open, looking at the king. I can play bishop e6, hitting the a2 pawn, followed by the rooks coming into c8. Or, of course, I can even play bishop to f5 and rook c8, hitting the c2 pawn. Short, this is just huge, huge advantage for black. White has to be very careful and just keep the, maybe trade a few bishops and just keep the game equal. But the attack is just way too fast. So after queen takes, here my opponent realized, well, something went wrong. Castle looks dangerous. Why don't I just play a solid move c3? Reasonable, right? But in reality, black is still on top. So bishop f5. Notice that white's still behind in development. Castles would be very dangerous because of queen a4. a2 pawn is weak. So, and here white sort of panicked. He realized that the rook is coming to d8. He's got to do something, and he moved his queen out of the way. And this is just a perfect opportunity for black to strike. Within my next move, I pretty much crush white on the spot. Let's see if you can find it. And the key idea here is realizing that white's stronghold, the pawn on c3, is not strong at all. As a matter of fact, there is a really cool tactic. Bishop takes, pawn check, pawn takes, queen takes check, and then the rook is hit and white is busted. So this little miniature illustrates how if white tries to follow the Yugoslav setup without even thinking, and black manages to play d5 in one go, white is going to face some serious difficulties. So you may ask, well, is there anything white can do after d5 other than simply massive trades? Well, another possibility here is to take on c6 and try to play e5. So again, white is trying to play the Yugoslav attack, but this is very different from the regular dragon. After knight d7, f4, e6 exclam, black is already getting ready to move the pawns in the center. With the half-open b file, white is not going to survive the attack. So if white castles c5, this is just really bad. White's attack is lacking, whereas black is ready to jump with d4. And the funny part is that if white tries to stop this move c5 with knight a4, right, logical idea to put pressure on the c5 square, there is a really funny tactic here. And it starts after knight takes e5 exclam. Pawn takes, and black just wins on the spot. Gets the knight back with this check, hitting the king and knight. And then after, let's say, g3 or so, queen takes. This pawn is really weak. Eventually, black should be able to prevail. So these illustrations really show you how white has to be extremely careful when faced with an accelerated dragon. White can forget about going long, going queenside. Instead, white should really try to castle short. And then we get a typical play where black gets his own trumps. So this little introduction, again, I want to highlight how important it is, the difference between the regular dragon and the accelerated dragon. So what we're going to cover in this DVD are various ways white can try to face the accelerated dragon. So we're going to go over the key idea here after g6, d4, queen takes, right? Taking advantage that the fact that knight is still in b8. We're also going to go over this idea c3. The idea is basic. Just want to take control over the center with e4 and d4 pawns. And I will show you how to handle this. After bishop g7, d4, takes, there is a very important moment that black has to not miss here. d5 exclam. And we're going to go over details what white should do after that, and black in turn as well. So this is kind of the way to try to take advantage of the early g6. And then white can simply transpose into the regular accelerated. So after d4 takes, knight c6, knight c3, bishop g7, here bishop e3, and after knight f6 we're going to take a look at knight takes and e5. And here, very important moment to play knight g8 and not be afraid of this move. We're going to go over details, what to do here next. And of course, the main line is bishop to c4. So here, black has several ways to counter this move. Black can either castle or play queen a5. And I will show you the simple means. I like this move, queen a5, to force white into castling short. Well, because of this tactic, right? And after white castle short, we're going to go over this position in detail as well. And finally, one thing that makes Accelerated Dragon a potential target, especially if you play against a high-rated opponent, is the Marzi bind. Now, what is this Marzi bind that I'm talking about? Well, after e4, c5, knight f3, g6, white can play d4, takes, and knight c6, c4. This is the space grabbing move. Eventually, the idea to play f3 and b3, solidify the pawns, and control over the d5 square gives white a lot of space and key outpost. So we're going to go over this in quite a lot of detail because here black really needs to know what to do. If you don't know what's going on, you can kind of suffer for a long time and just get outplayed. The fact that it's called the bind is because of these pawns, and in turn, because of the light, they're all on the light squares, we actually gonna play on the dark squares. And here the dark square strategy comes into play, and I'm gonna show you the best move order, how black can get the initiative. So let us start with the simplest way. If white tries to punish black right away after e4, c5, knight f3, g6, d4 pawn move. So logical, c takes d, queen takes d4. Black did not commit by playing with knight c6. White is hitting the rook. Question is what to do next. Well, don't be afraid. Play knight f6, and e5 is going to be met by knight c6, hitting the queen. And here the queen has to be actually placed on a very careful square. If you just go back, there's a very simple tactic that loses pawn. Knight takes pawn, knight takes check. You got to be very careful for watching out for these tactics. And then black, of course, gets the piece back and wins the key central pawn. So the best move is probably to play queen to a4. I should also mention that queen h4, with the idea to try to get maybe once the knight moves, the bishop to h6 fails due to the same exact tactic. I won a bunch of blitz games with this tactic. Knight takes, check, and again, with this double attack, you're going to win the piece, and in the process, you pick up a central pawn. So queen a4 is the main line, knight d5. So really, to justify this whole setup for white, this knight is pretty powerful in the center. White needs to make another queen move, queen e4, hitting the knight. And I just like the simple move, knight to b6. The key is black is setting up for a very powerful center thrust. So after knight c3, d5 exclam, pawn takes, and now bishop f5, another exclam. Notice with every move, you are taking advantage of the prematurely developed queen. And it's already very hard for white to find the best square for the queen. Queen e2 has been played a number of times, but it blocks the bishop. And if white takes on e7, I actually like a simple idea. Taking with the bishop, yes, you're down a pawn, but look at this position. After queen a2 castles, white's position is just in big trouble. We have the e file wide open. The queen and the king are right there. The bishop is blocked. In addition, there is this knight b4 idea hitting the c2 pawn. I think black just has overwhelming compensation for the pawn here. So let's take a look at the after bishop f5, queen e2 move. Well, here we just simply pick up the pawn. And again, white needs to find a nice way to develop his pieces. He can try to harass the queen with knight b5. And here black has to play very carefully, because if you just drop back to d7 after bishop f4, knight c7 and knight d6 checks are really annoying. Notice that knight d6 is possible because the e7 pawn is pinned. But black can simply drop back to queen b8. And now when the knight comes to d4, this is not a big deal. Bishop g7, knight takes, g takes f. And even though white has a bishop pair, the fact that white still has to waste time to move this bishop will give black plenty of time to strengthen his position. In addition, I really like this dark square bishop controlling the whole board. And here we can say black is totally fine. So let's roll back and take a look at other possibilities for white. So another move is, instead of e5, is to play something more quiet, such as the move knight c3. But here, once again, we hit back with knight c6, queen a4, and d6. Notice that e5 is not a big deal. There is more than one way to play here for black. Black can play the aggressive move knight g4, pawn takes, bishop g7, simply sacking a pawn for initiative, of course. And if h3, then the knight can get rerouted to e5, knight takes, bishop takes, pawn takes, queen takes. And again, white is behind in development. There's this big threat of bishop takes c3, and eventually black is going to castle and have pretty good compensation. This is one way to play it. Another way to play this position is more quiet way, just simply taking on e5, knight takes, bishop d7 is possible, and even if white manages to get the two bishops, it's not the end of the world. But I like a simple idea, queen d4, forcing white to go into the endgame. So, of course, if queen takes, knight takes, the c2 pawn is under attack. So usually white simply takes on c6, queen takes, knight takes, and pawn takes c6. So this endgame actually happened in one of my games against Ray Robson, who is a pretty famous American youngster, very strong grandmaster. And I managed to hold white off pretty easily because of the d5 outpost. So basically the plan is you're going to put the bishop on g7, knight on d5, castles. Yes, you have some structural damage, but the half-open b file and the d5 square together with the long diagonal should be sufficient for at least equality. Again, this is a balanced position, and if you feel like playing it, you can, or play the more aggressive knight g4 move that I showed you earlier. And finally, in addition to knight c3 and e5, white can also try to play bishop b5. The idea is quite simple. You want to stop knight c6, and here I like the move a6. The position gets pretty crazy. For instance, e5, pawn takes, pawn takes. So both sides have their trumps. Black managed to get the bishop pair, and now we have a quick activity with knight c6. But in terms of white still has this annoying pawn on f6. But I still like black here. If pawn takes check, queen takes, queen e3, it's very important to play this move b4. You want to kill off this knight, not allow any knight c3 ideas. And then if white castles, queen takes, bishop g7, hitting this pawn, c3, I just like the simple castles. Notice that taking on b4 is no good because of this pawn. Eventually black is going to play d5, get his bishop out to e6 or f5, and have pretty powerful dynamic compensation for the pawn weaknesses for these pawns. So I like this position a lot. Now, if white doesn't take on e7, let's say white decides to keep the pressure, and for instance white plays queen to e3. Well, in this case, black has several ways to play. You can play e6 right away, again going after this pawn, and it's not so easy for white to actually defend that pawn. You can also play this move b4 right away to try to stop the knight followed by e6, but it's a little bit slow, right? So both of them are playable and the positions are pretty interesting. And finally, if the queen goes to h4, the pawn on b5 and the rook on a8 spring to life. Rook a4, exclam. Well, it turns out that the queen has to go, and there's really no good squares anymore. Queen h3, you get hit again with d5. So this position is really cool, and there's a lot of uncharted territory here for both sides. And if you're really well prepared here as black, you're gonna do quite well. So this pretty much covers all the key aspects of the queen takes d4. So let me just review them pretty quickly. So after e4, c5, knight f3, g6, this is called the hyper accelerated dragon move order. Again, the idea is that we don't play knight c6, which opens its whole new door with the bishop b5. Why even bother? Instead, we simply play g6. So after d4, c takes d. Of course, knight takes d4 just transposes, and queen takes d4. We are not afraid. After knight f6, black is fine in all the lines. So we looked at e5, knight c6, queen a4, knight d5. Eventually, after queen e4, black drops back. With d5 gets very powerful counterplay. And we also looked at more quiet moves by white. Knight c3, knight c6, queen a4. And after d6, e5, both knight g4 and d takes e followed by queen d4 give black sufficient counterplay. And finally, we looked at the move bishop b5. Again, the idea is quite simple, stopping knight c6. But here we have some really cool tactics. After a6, e5, a takes b, e takes f, knight c6. The position is very unconventional, yet I think black has enough resources to fight back. And eventually when the position opens up, the two bishops will play a vital role, and especially this half-open a file. So this was part 1 of the DVD, and I will talk in length about the main lines where black, where white takes on d4 with the knight, and black in turn fianchettos his bishop. Thank you, and talk to you later.